I want some chow fun now.
Okay. We've got some, this stuff is, I mean, what happens is you start doing this stuff, and I want to welcome people who've just joined us. Thank you. Um, what I discover about this is when you start to sort of get it, you realize just how worthwhile it is, and what a gift this stuff is, really and truly. And it's a gift to me to share this with you. It really is. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So here we are with the share. So I wanted to go back and do the Torah Temimah. I can't help it. I know I should just stick to the Rashi, but I can't help it. It's just
Oh, we
too
enjoy the Torah Temimah. What
yummy.
verse is it that we are
This
doing?
is the one that we did yesterday. Vayakom Melech Hadash. Right? This Rashi basically
Mhm.
quotes this from Sota 11a. A
Okay.
new king arose. Pligi Rav Ushmuel. Rav, these two great Amoraim disagree with each other. Chad Amar Chadash Mamash. One said he was really new, was a brand new king. V'chad Amar Shenit Chadshu Gzerotav. And the other one said, no, 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 no. It's, well, maybe it's not, no, 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 no. He says the point is that his edicts were on a whole new basis. He took a whole new approach, new policies. Manda Amar Chadash Mamash. What's the basis of the argument? The one who says that he really was a new king. Dichtiv Chashash. He says that's the pshat. That's what it means. He was new king. Umanda Amar Shinit Chadshuk Zerotav. And the one who said, no, 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 the point is that his policies were new, because it doesn't say that the previous king died and a new king ruled, governed. And I'm going to ask somebody to mute, please. Please mute. I can hear a lot of incidental sounds. All right, so here we go with bet. Ulefi perush zeh, and according to this interpretation, shenit chadshuk zerotav, that his policies, his edicts were totally new. Tzarich yun, we need to look into this more carefully, Ktsat, a little bit. Lefaresh halashon vayakom. So what it revolves around is this phrase vayakom melech hadash. This phrase, a new king arose. Kevan, why? De lo kam ata klal. Because he says, and this took me a while to puzzle out, because there's no there's no punctuation marks. He's saying because the word come doesn't really belong here at all. It's a weird word to use in this phrase. Ve'ulai yifaresh, and maybe we can explain the usage of this word vayakom, arose, got up. Shekam al Yisrael b'gzerotav, that he rose up against the Jewish people, against Israel, by his edicts. And he gives some examples. Milashon vayakom kain al hevel echav. We have this phrase in the Torah before, back in early Genesis, where it says, Cain arose against his brother Abel. So there's that word, vayakom. And another example, ki ka'asher yakum ish al re'ehu. It's similar to a man rising against his neighbor to attack him. V'afal pi de lafizeh, and despite the fact that given these examples I've just given, that he's given, right? Hayat tzarich lomar, it should have said al Yisrael. It should have said vayakom melech al Yisrael, or melech chadash al Yisrael, or something like that. Here, ach yesh lomar, you could still say hakavana belashon al Mitzrayim, that when it says he arose al Mitzrayim, right? It says vayakom, go back to the actual verse, excuse me, itself, right? Melech al Mitzrayim, right? Against, so he's saying this word al is similar to al Kayin, right? Echav. So it's similar to the use of this vayakom al is is saying like rose against, attacked, i.e., attacked. So he says, it's strange, right? That it should have said Al Yisrael. Let's find the place back here. Ach Yeshlama, Belashon al Mitzrayim, that when he says, and he's got another, he explains this language, all right, that Yeshlomar HaKavanah, that the intent, Belashon al Mitzrayim, that when it uses this terminology al Mitzrayim against Egypt, he means it's an ellipsis. Al Bnei Yisrael HaYoshvim Mitzrayim, that what he meant was against the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt. And how does he get this? Ume'ein halashon, it's similar to the usage of the language V'ha'ir Shushan Nevocha. The city of Shushan was perplexed. So, and likewise, and this is the Megillah, of course, Megillat Esther, where it says V'ir Shushan Sohola Usamecha, that it was, shining and happy, full of rejoicing, I shouldn't use the words, I'm sorry, not shining, but just they were full of joy, right? They were dancing in the streets. Because when it uses the word Shushan there, it doesn't mean all the inhabitants of Shushan. It refers to the Jewish people who were living there. So likewise, the Jewish people living in Egypt, when it says Al Mitzrayim. Or de Yeshlomar, or you can say, that the person who holds that his policies, his edicts were totally new, right? Svarales gamken shamelach hayachadash. You could say, and I think Lauren, you mentioned this yesterday, that you could also hold that he was a new king with new edicts. Rak hosif lidrosh, but that this person with that opinion adds to that drasha, shegam nidchatshu gzerotav. Not only he was a new broom that swept clean, v'diyuko mimilat chadash, and his diuk, right? He puts an emphasis on this word chadash, not so much on the vayakum, but on the chadash. Ya'an deshem chadash Yunach al Pirov, because in general, and why? So he's fussing over this word chadash, because the word that using this noun chadash, Yunach al Pirov, that usually it's used in connection with, for the most part, lemelech chadash mi mishpacha chadasha. That if it's going to say new, then it means a king from a whole new dynasty, from a whole new different family. Mishel Hamelech HaKodim, from the previous king. In other words, because Ma she'eino kativ hacha me'ikara, however, there was nothing to suggest this originally. Malka mishpachat paro. Me'ik. So let me make sure I can read the syntax here. Right. Hacha me'ikara malka mishpachat paro. Originally, the family of Pharaoh was ruling. V'ata mishpachat paro, because it suggests that now it's also the dynasty of Pharaoh. There's no suggestion of a new dynasty. V'im kain, and if that's the case, in other words, there's no suggestion when it says Melech Hadash that a whole new dynasty was ruling, because it was the Paro dynasty. V'im kain havalei lomar, and if it were the case that it meant a whole new dynasty, which is appropriate for the word Hadash, vayakum melech acher. So if it's not a new dynasty, it should have written a different king, another king. Instead of Vayakom Melech Hadash, it should have said Vayakom Melech Acher. Veda, and no, ki Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer Perek Yud Aleph, that in this midrash called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer in chapter 11, V'chein hu b'Sefer HaYashar, and there's also another midrash called Sefer HaYashar, Mina b'mispar hamalachim shemalchu misof ha'olam va'ad sofo. They count out, they spell out the number of kings, okay, who ruled from one end of the world to the other end of the world. Et Yosef. They include Yosef as one of these great kings who had empires. When they say Sof ha'olam va'ad sofo, they're talking about the known world at the time. Ve'zeh leshono. And now he's going to quote, Arba'im shana haya Yosef mishneh lemelech b'Mitzrayim. For 40 years, Joseph was second in command to the king in Mitzrayim. V'arba'im shana malach la'atzmo. And another 40 years, he ruled by himself. He alone was ruling Egypt. Dichtiv vayakom melech chadash. Because it says here, vayakom melech chadash, a new king arose. In other words, not from Joseph's family, and that's why it's chadash. Ad kan leshono, end of quote. Ve'eno meva'ar tam hara'aya. But where's the proof for this? There's no clarification as to how he gets this. Ve'yesh lomar dediyek, and it's possible to say, one can argue, dediyek kediyuk hagemara, and you could say that this is similar, that he draws us out from the emphasis placed within the Gemara, the attention, so to speak. A diuk is when you pay special attention to a word and you derive interpretations through it. Because it doesn't say vayamot vayimloch. It doesn't say the former king died and the new king ruled. And this particular midrash here does not hold doesn't hold the Gemara's suggestion here that his edicts were new, that he had whole new policies. Umefaresh, and he explains the kahe adasamichle besof parsha vayachi, because what the point is that the book of Exodus follows the book of Genesis, and in parsha vayachi, if you look at the last verse of parsha vayachi, the very last verse talks about Joseph dying and being buried in a casket in Mitzrayim. And after that, we start the book of Exodus, and it says, V'achar kach, in the book of Exodus, it says, Vayakom melech chadash, a new king arose. And if you assume that Joseph was the king, and it says there, Joseph died, now we have this new king. Ve'im kain, and if this is the case, mashma, it implies, then mikodem malach Yosef, that prior to this new king, Joseph was in fact the king. Ulefize, and according to this, yeh hemshech hayan ala seder. And if that's the case, the languages make sense. It all sort of fits together. Mikodem vayamot v'achar kach vayakom. Prior to that, he died, that is, Joseph died, v'achar kach vayakom, and afterwards arose, v'hainu hach de vayim loch v'dok. And this is exactly what it talks about, that this new king arose. That's the analysis. So you can see it's extremely penetrating. Let's see here. Okay, just one more. It's not a long one. Asher lo yada et Yosef. He did not know Joseph. He didn't recognize Joseph.
Excuse me.
Say that again.
Can I
Absolutely.
ask something?
Yes.
Joseph died before his brothers.
Yes, he did.
So that would mean that his brothers would have known this new king.
Possibly.
I had the impression always that they were talking about, several generations before the new action starts, right?
So,
then the Pharaoh starts clamping down on the Bnei Israel and then starts, oppressing.
right.
Things were good for a while. Well, they
but not often.
were fruitful and multiplied.
No. By the way, notice how things can turn around on a dime very, very quickly. It just, things depend on personalities so much. On, individuals with huge amounts of power can change things very, very much for everybody else. The other piece too that you might be interested in is that when it'll talk a little later about Amram, okay, that is Moses' father, who marries the daughter of Levi, and that's Yocheved. Yocheved is considered to be, in other words, he married an aunt. I believe that would make it. And that Yocheved is considered Bat Levi. So it's quite possible that that some of the brothers may have been around. And if Joseph died at 110, yes, so yeah, the brothers already started the shibud, already saw or experienced the shibud beginning. So we're not talking about that much time between the one and the other.
Can I ask, what is the support for the idea that Joseph was king?
Well, it's
Besides the fact that he died and then the new king arose, because
Correct.
that seems to me pretty
I know,
much of a
it's
stretch.
pretty remarkable. Okay, so it's not like I can give you a proof, without any question about. I don't know what happened to my share here, by the way. I have no idea what just disappeared. I don't know if it disappeared for you too. Oh, there it is. It's back. I think two things. One is that if you allow for the fact that this phrase Vayakom Melech Hadash has all the implications that we are drawing from it. Number one, that it just makes a lot more sense if we say that Joseph was in fact the ruler, even though it doesn't say it explicitly. But something else too, as I mentioned this before, when Joseph arrived in Egypt and stood before Pharaoh to interpret his dreams, how old was he? It says explicitly in the text,
30.
he was 30 years old, and he died at 110, meaning that he lived another 80 years. And what I think, I don't know why I thought I read this somewhere else, but that it seems to me, unless I was just sort of figuring it out, that for 40 years he was, I think it says so. There it is. Oh, I'm sorry, it said it explicitly. Arba'im Shana. For 40 years, right? 40 years, Arba'im Shana, Haya Yosef Mishlei Melech B'Mitzrayim. For 40 years, Joseph was the second in command. For Arba'im Shana Malach Latzmo. And for 40 years, and so that takes care of the 80 years that he felt that he lived.
It also says he was second in command
Yes.
for 40.
For 40 years, and so the previous Pharaoh died, the one he was second in command to. I mean, he certainly seems to come across that he's quite a bit older than Joseph. He dies, and Joseph takes over. I mean, the very
Why would they
fact
allow that?
I'm not convinced.
Oh, no, okay. Please
Why would they
understand.
allow that?
Okay.
He was this foreigner. Why would the Mitzrayim have allowed a foreigner to rule them for 40 years?
Actually, that's quite common. By the way, if you study history, you will see that it is not uncommon for people to choose a king from a different family. That is not uncommon.
But if the Torah wanted,
let me back up. So to just answer your question, Sherbeth, it is not a compelling proof. No one is trying to suggest that it's a compelling proof. I like to make a distinction. There are two types of proofs. There are good proofs or good suggestive proofs, and there are compelling proofs. This is not a compelling proof, but it does allow things to fit together and make a little bit more sense. The assumption is that we're having some issues with this phrase, Vayakom Melech Hadash. If you don't have any problems with it, if you don't sense the tension within those words and the fact that they are problematic, okay, in their syntax, this will not convince you of anything. But if you feel that we need to search for something to make sense, that'll make the maximum sense out of this. And the truth is, that's the basis of many hypotheses. In other words, what you do is you have a conundrum and you try to think of what makes the most sense. And very, very often, what makes the most sense, I don't know if we'd say it's an Occam's razor approach as well, okay, turns out to be the truth. you know. The example I love to give is that I believe that there's a mountain range between the Kamchatka Peninsula and the, in the Bering Strait, if I have my geography correct. And this was a theory, it was a hypothesis, because according to the person who was the geographer or the geologist who was studying this stuff, it just made sense. And then they checked it out, and it was true. There is. So, I don't think your one's belief in Judaism isn't going to crumble if you don't buy this particular theory.
No,
It's just
no.
interesting.
In my case, I would just say that Vayakom Melech Hadash al Mitzrayim
Yes.
doesn't necessarily imply the exact same thing as Vayakom Kaina al Hevel Achiv. Now, I'd have to try to prove it. The only examples we got here of Vayakom al are mean someone rose up to attack somebody else.
Yes, that's correct.
And there might be other, but it would help my case if there were other examples of Vayakom al where it just means what it seems to mean here, which is somebody rose up over somebody else.
Okay, so you'll have to find them. I mean, you can go to a concordance and take a look and see what else of under Vayakom, and see what other examples there are. I don't feel that Baruch Halevi Epstein is saying this is a compelling evidence. He's saying there is supportive evidence for this particular position. I think what he is doing is he's entertaining, and in both senses of that word, an alternative understanding and a deeper understanding of the language of the Torah here.
Does Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer tend to say kind of wild and crazy things?
I don't know. I haven't studied enough Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. I just think it's sort of an interesting midrash. I may be going out way too much on a limb to say that it's, gosh, it's if you know how, for example, the Zohar tends to interpret stuff, it's sort of somewhere beyond. When I started looking at the Zohar seriously for the first time, I realized that it was simply a midrash. I mean, to say simply is a wrong word to use, but the point is, it's basically midrash, but it's taking the midrashic method, into a much deeper ocean, and likewise, it seems to me that Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, from the little bit that I've read of it, tends to take things that are in Midrash Rabbah or the Tanchuma or stuff like that into sort of deeper territory. It all, if you haven't heard me share this before, this is all predicated on which I think you will totally understand, a deep love of the text. You may have heard me say this before, that if you remember being in love and getting a letter from the person you loved, you don't just read it once. You try to milk it for all the implications that it can have. And this is a people that is in love with the text. These are love letters from God. The Torah is a love letter from God. That's what it is. A love letter from the divine.
The book is on Sefaria, the Pirkei
De Rabbi Eliezer. Yes, in fact, I think it's even in a PDF format, even just, I think it was translated some time ago.
It is, but on Sefaria, you can jump to any chapter out of like 46 or something. And,
Right.
Oh, wow.
it's all like midrash and agadic stuff.
Yes.
Well, whoever supports that take on this would have to explain why the Torah doesn't tell us, and Joseph became king of Egypt, because that's a kind of a big thing to leave out.
Well, it could imply it in some of Joseph's policies towards the end, which are puzzling in the Torah itself, as to what he did with the land and how although he said he did it for Pharaoh. Okay, but that's sort of a very troubling, somewhat of a troubling passage when they run out of food and he basically enslaves them.
Enslaves, yeah.
So again, these are things to puzzle over. And sometimes we'll find out later. Why doesn't the Torah explicit about it? I think that's a fairly straightforward question. I think there's lots that the Torah isn't explicit on, but some of the stuff that one can mine out of it are a little easier to see what's being said here. I think if the Torah was so explicit, it wouldn't be as interesting. I think, why do people do crossword puzzles? Why do people do Sudokus? Why do people do jigsaw puzzles? Because that's the way we're created. Not necessarily everybody, but it's a fairly human activity to try to solve mysteries and to solve puzzles that in some ways it's, part of what makes life worth living. So, all right, let's see. We are running out of time. I guess I need to do I wanted to do this next one. Asher lo yada et Yosef, who did not know Joseph, deheve dami kamanda lo yada leklal. He acted as if he didn't know him at all, didn't know who this person was. So it also has some modern rings to it. Okay, so here we go. The Torah Temimah. Sheshachach kol hatovot she'asa Yosef leMitzrayim. He forgot all the good things that Joseph did for Egypt. I mean, basically, he helped them survive. Udrasha zo tisov lamanda amar. And this particular drush makes more sense. It sort of goes along with the opinion that says melech chadash shenitchatshu gzeirotav. That when it says melech chadash, it refers to the fact that he had whole brand new policies, as is explained in the previous drush. Upashut de medayek halashon, and it's clear, it's straightforward, that he is again making a diuk. He's focusing on the language v'hanyan and the issue asher lo yada, who did not know. The imka'e al ha'eder hakara bifnim, because if it was really talking about forgetting, in other words, the point of this drash is that he knew about Joseph. He was aware of it. He just acted as if it wasn't there. That's it. So why? Havalele, because if it meant he really forgot Joseph, he really didn't know Joseph, he should have said Asher lo hikir. He didn't recognize him. He didn't know who he was. Ve'im lefaresh lo yada klal me'inyan Yosef ugdulato. And if this phrase was coming to tell us that he didn't know anything about Joseph and his greatness, ze lo yitachen, it's not possible. And I think this is something Lauren said yesterday. Doesn't make any sense. Shelo yada mima'ora gdola v'nichbada zo, that he wouldn't have known of this amazing and important event that took place, the Korot HaMedina, in the chronicles of the land. Ela al korchacha, but you have to say it's a fortiori. She'asa atzmo kalo yada ukemavoar, that he acted. He is acting. He wasn't really there. He was acting as if he didn't recognize him. He didn't know Kemavoar, and as has been explained. So I think this is a good place. I'm going to stop the share here.
And possibly,
yes,
another possibility of what it could mean that he didn't know Joseph is that he knew once Joseph took power, but he wasn't really privy on the inside information of the things that the relationship that Joseph had with the Pharaoh and the dreams and everything that led to his taking power. That he knew Joseph because everybody knew Joseph once he was in charge, but not everybody knew why Joseph was in charge.
okay, that's a possibility. I would say, though, that it seems to me that the whole way in which Joseph came to power would be one of great interest. And I mean, when you read about stuff, it never seems as significant as when you're living through stuff. But when you consider the degree of this famine that it had on the land of Egypt and the effects it might have had Joseph not stepped in and planned the policies. I think I've mentioned this before, just a few years ago, I came across some stuff about the French Revolution, and it was written by, can't think of the person's name, on the history of the French Revolution. And lo and behold, I had no idea about this, and many of you may have known this, but when I was studying the French Revolution in high school, they never mentioned it that I recollect, because I'm pretty sure I would have known it. But what really got, what I heard about was basically it was the bourgeoisie, and because they were somewhat impounded as opposed to the third estate, I think they called it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They wanted to assume more power, but something like that. I'm oversimplifying. But what really, really, really tore at the fabric of French, and by the way, they liked the king. Most people were very happy with the king. Okay, what tore it apart was this incredible famine that took place in France and in Europe at the time that absolutely destroyed the fabric of civilization. And I remember a phrase this particular person uses. He said, first of all, food became incredibly expensive. And he said, you couldn't even buy bad flour, rotting flour for a lot of money.
I'm just saying that maybe they didn't know about the dream, not that they didn't know
Oh,
that he helped with the famine, but
yeah.
maybe Pharaoh didn't want them to know about his personal business.
I think that might be putting some Western values on this. I don't know. I think it's a pretty fabulous story. That's why it's lasted this long.
But maybe
I
that's
mean,
what
it's not like I'm not suggesting for one second that that's, untenable. I'm just saying, you sort of have to weigh this. But it is. I mean, look, I think you're trying to come up with a plausible explanation for what was going on. Let me put it this way. Lack of appreciation is like right out there. And we forget so quickly. How things were when things get better. It's a sad commentary, unless we intentionally make a point to keep it in mind. So, well, thank you all very much. I'm going to stop the recording and look forward to tomorrow.